Hey everyone! Tonight we're travelling back to a time of dynasties, dragons and dysentery. We're diving into what life was really like in ancient China. Forget the martial arts movies and glorified palaces you've seen on screen. The truth is, you probably wouldn't last a single day. So before we begin this journey through jade and misery, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these deep dives into history's uncomfortable truths. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe adjust your pillow, and let's ease into tonight's journey together through the Middle Kingdom, where everything was regulated, ritualized, and probably trying to kill you slowly. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 100 CE, during the reign of Emperor He of Han. The good news? You're alive in one of the most advanced civilizations on Earth. The bad news? That doesn't mean life is comfortable. Your bed is a simple wooden platform called a chuang, covered with a thin straw mat that's been your sleeping surface for months. There's no mattress, no box spring, definitely no memory foam. Just wood, straw, and the constant ache in your back that comes from sleeping on what amounts to a slightly padded board. You wake to the sound of the wooden fish drum echoing from the local temple, marking the hour of the rabbit, around 6 a.m. in modern time. But time isn't measured in neat little hours like we know them. The day is divided into 12 periods, each named after an animal in the zodiac cycle. You don't have an alarm clock, just the rhythm of temple bells, roosters, and the gradual lightening of the paper windows in your small courtyard home. Your house, if you're lucky enough to be a merchant or minor official, is built around a central courtyard. The rooms are small, dark, and connected by narrow corridors that always seem to be drafty. The walls are made of rammed earth or brick, and the roof is heavy clay tiles that leak when it rains, which, during monsoon season, is often. Your room has paper windows that let in some light but offer no real view of the outside world, just shadows and silhouettes. The air is thick with the smell of burning charcoal from the kitchen, incense from the family shrine, and something less pleasant that you can't quite identify but suspect involves the neighbour's pigs. Privacy is a luxury you don't have. If you're married, your spouse is beside you. If you have children, they're probably in the same room. If you're part of an extended family, which most people are, then grandparents, aunts, uncles and cousins are all within earshot of your every movement. And speaking of movement, getting out of bed is already a calculated risk. The wooden floor is cold, and your feet, if you're wealthy enough to have shoes, are about to be squeezed into rigid silk slippers that offer about as much arch support as a rice cracker. If you're poor, well, you're going barefoot until you can afford something made of straw or felt. Welcome to morning in Han Dynasty China, where the sun rises on the world's most organised empire, and you're about to discover just how organised your suffering is going to be. So you've managed to roll off your wooden sleeping board. Congratulations. Now nature calls, and in Han Dynasty China, answering that call is an adventure in public humiliation and creative engineering. Let's start with the basics. There's no toilet paper. The concept won't reach China for another 1,000 years, and even then, it'll be a luxury reserved for emperors. Instead, you have a collection of bamboo strips called chuki. Think of them as reusable wooden, let's call them personal hygiene tools. They're about the size of a pencil, smooth on one side, and they require a technique that no modern person should ever have to learn. If you're fortunate enough to be wealthy, your house might have a private latrine. It's a small building in your courtyard, usually positioned downwind from the main house. Though downwind is relative when the whole neighbourhood smells like a barnyard. Inside, you'll find a wooden seat with a hole, positioned over a deep pit that gets cleaned out by night soilmen. These are the unsung heroes of ancient China. Poor souls who cart away human waste in the dead of night to sell to farmers as fertiliser. But here's the thing about that private latrine. It's not really private. It's often a family affair, with multiple holes side by side. Medieval Chinese families didn't have our modern concept of bathroom privacy. Going to the toilet was as communal as eating dinner. You might find yourself sitting next to your father-in-law, discussing the weather while nature takes its course. If you're poor, and statistically speaking you probably are, then you're using public latrines. These are long wooden structures with multiple holes, no dividers, and absolutely no privacy. Think of them as medieval social clubs, except the conversation topics are limited and the smell is indescribable. The floors are often wet with things you don't want to think about. And the flies, oh, the flies are everywhere. And then there's the paperwork situation. Remember those bamboo strips? They're not disposable. After use, they go into a communal pot of salt water for cleaning. Yes, you're sharing your bathroom utensils with everyone else in your family or neighbourhood. The strips get reused until they break, at which point they're replaced with fresh bamboo. For women, the situation is even more complicated. And menstruation is handled with cloth rags that get washed and reused. There are no modern sanitary products, no privacy, and certainly no paid sick leave for monthly discomfort. Women are expected to continue their daily duties regardless, often while dealing with cramps, mess, and the social stigma that comes with a natural bodily function. What about cleaning up afterward? Well, there's water if you're lucky, usually cold water from a ceramic basin. Soap exists, but it's made from ash and animal fat, and it's harsh enough to strip the skin off your hands. Most people just rinse with cold water and call it clean. And here's a fun fact. Going to the bathroom after dark requires a trip outside, often to a structure separate from the main house, carrying a small oil lamp for light. Imagine stumbling through your dark courtyard, lamp in one hand, hoping you don't trip over the family dog or step in something unpleasant, just to reach a smelly hole in the ground. The whole process from start to finish is cold, unsanitary, public, and often dangerous. And this is just how your day begins. You still haven't eaten, gotten dressed, or started working, but you've already been reminded that in ancient China, even the most basic human needs are complicated by the realities of life. In 100 CE, you survived the bathroom. Barely. Now your stomach is growling, and it's time for the first meal of the day. But don't expect bacon and eggs, or even a simple bowl of cereal. Breakfast in Han Dynasty China is a carefully calculated balance between nutrition, social status, and what's actually available to eat. If you're a peasant farmer, which 9 out of 10 people are, your breakfast is simple. A bowl of millet porridge. Not rice. Rice is still a luxury in many parts of China. Millet is cheaper, heartier, and grows in poor soil. Your porridge is thin, watery, and has the consistency of wallpaper paste. It's been cooking in the same iron pot for days with new ingredients added on top of whatever didn't get eaten yesterday. It's less of a recipe and more of an ongoing food experiment. The porridge might be flavoured with pickled vegetables if you're lucky, salt-preserved cabbage, radishes, or turnips that have been fermenting in clay jars for months. The vegetables are sour, salty, and sometimes a little fuzzy with mould. But mould is protein, right? At least that's what you tell yourself as you chew through the grey, stringy bits. If you're wealthy enough to be a merchant or low-level government official, you might have tea with your meal. But this isn't the delicate ceremony you've seen in movies. Tea in the Han Dynasty is bitter, green, and often mixed with ginger, salt, or even onions to make it more filling. It's less about flavour and more about warm liquid to help wash down your meal. Rice, when you can afford it, is brown, chewy, and often contaminated with small stones, dirt, and the occasional insect. You learn to chew carefully and spit out anything that crunches in the wrong way. White rice exists, but it's polished by hand, grain by grain, and costs more than most people make in a week. What about protein? If you're incredibly fortunate, you might have a small piece of salted fish or dried meat added to your porridge. But most of your protein comes from soybeans, either fermented into a paste or ground into a flour that's mixed with your grains. Soybeans are cheap, filling, and have the added benefit of not rotting as quickly as meat. Speaking of meat, forget about it unless it's a festival day or someone in your family has died and you're eating the sacrificial offerings. Pork exists, but it's expensive. Chicken is slightly more affordable, but chickens are more valuable for their eggs than their meat. Beef is essentially forbidden. Cattle are too valuable as work animals to be slaughtered for food, except in dire circumstances. Your bowl is made of clay, fired in a local kiln, and probably cracked from years of use. Your chopsticks, if you have them, are simple bamboo sticks that you've carved yourself. If you don't have chopsticks, you're eating with your hands or a wooden spoon that's been in your family for generations. The meal is eaten in silence. Conversation during meals is considered rude and bad for digestion. You eat quickly because everyone needs to get to work and the food gets cold fast in your unheated house. And you clean your bowl thoroughly because wasting food isn't just impractical, it's considered a moral failing. But here's the real kicker. You're probably still hungry after breakfast. The portions are small because food is scarce and expensive. Most people in Han Dynasty China live in a constant state of mild hunger, punctuated by seasonal famine and the occasional feast day when you can actually eat until you're full. So you finish your thin porridge, rinse your cracked bowl with cold water, and prepare for the day ahead. Your stomach is still rumbling, but that's normal. Hunger is just another part of life in ancient China, as constant and predictable as the sunrise. Now that you're dressed in your regulation-coloured hemp scratches and have achieved what passes for cleanliness in ancient China, it's time to work. And in the Han Dynasty, work isn't a career, it's survival, and it starts before dawn and ends after dark 6 days a week, for your entire life. If you're a farmer, which statistically you almost certainly are, your day begins with checking your rice paddies or millet fields before the sun comes up. Rice farming in ancient China is back-breaking labour that requires you to stand knee-deep in muddy water for hours at a time, bending over to plant, weed or harvest grain by hand. There are no machines, no tractors, just you, a wooden hoe and thousands of individual rice plants that need constant attention. The irrigation system is complex and community managed, which means your water supply depends on cooperation with your neighbours. If someone upstream diverts too much water, your crops die and your family starves. Water rights disputes are common and often violent. People have been killed over access to irrigation ditches. Your tools are simple and made of wood, bamboo, or iron if you're wealthy enough. A wooden plough pulled by an ox if you're fortunate, or pulled by yourself if you're not. Hand tools that wear out constantly and need to be repaired or replaced with materials you have to gather and prepare yourself. If you're a craftsman, a potter, blacksmith, weaver, or carpenter, your work is equally demanding but in different ways. You work in small, poorly ventilated workshops filled with smoke, dust, and dangerous materials. Blacksmiths work next to fires hot enough to melt iron, breathing smoke and metal fumes all day. Potters breathe clay dust that settles in their lungs and causes chronic coughing. Weavers spend hours hunched over looms in dark rooms, straining their eyes and backs. Women's work is never done. If you're a woman, you work in the fields alongside the men, then come home to cook, clean, weave cloth, tend children, care for elderly relatives, and manage the household. There's no such thing as a day off. Even when you're pregnant or nursing, you're expected to maintain your full workload. Children start working around age 5 or 6. They help with simple tasks like feeding animals, gathering firewood, or spinning thread. By age 10, they're doing adult work scaled to their size. There are no child labour laws, no mandatory education, no concept of childhood as a protected time for play and learning. The workday is determined by the sun. You start working when it's light enough to see and stop when it's too dark to continue safely. During harvest season, you might work 18-hour days for weeks at a time. During winter, when there's less farm work, you spend time repairing tools, weaving cloth, and preparing for the next growing season. Payment is usually in kind rather than money. Farmers pay taxes to their local officials in grain. Craftsmen trade their products for food and raw materials. Money exists, but most people never see it. The economy runs on barter, debt and obligation. Working conditions are dangerous. There are no safety regulations, no workers' compensation, no medical insurance. If you're injured on the job, you either recover on your own or you die. Farming accidents are common. Cuts from sharp tools, injuries from animals, broken bones from falls. Workshop accidents are even worse. Burns, crushed fingers, lung diseases from breathing dust and fumes. And the government is always watching. Local officials keep detailed records of who's working, what they're producing, and how much they owe in taxes. Failure to meet your work obligations can result in fines, beatings, or forced labour on government projects. There's no retirement. You work until you physically can't work anymore, then you become dependent on your children for survival. If you don't have children, or if your children can't or won't support you, you become one of the beggars who crowd around temples and markets, hoping for charity. Work in ancient China isn't about fulfillment or career advancement. It's about producing enough food and goods to keep yourself and your family alive for another day, while meeting the demands of a government that sees you as a source of labour and taxes rather than as a human being with rights and dignity. It's midday, and if you're lucky enough to get a break from work, it's time for your main meal. In Han Dynasty China, food isn't just sustenance, it's a complex social, economic, and health minefield that requires careful navigation to avoid starvation, poisoning, or social disgrace. Let's start with what's actually available to eat. Rice is the staple crop in southern China, but it's expensive and often mixed with cheaper grains like millet, barley, or even ground acorns to make it stretch further. The rice you eat is brown, chewy, and full of small stones and dirt that you have to pick out as you eat. White rice exists, but it's polished by hand and costs more than most people earn in a month. In northern China, wheat is more common, usually in the form of thick noodles or steamed bread. But the wheat is often contaminated with ergot, a fungus that causes hallucinations, convulsions, and sometimes death. Ergot poisoning is common enough that people just accept occasional fits of madness as a normal part of eating grain. Vegetables are seasonal and heavily preserved. During harvest time, you might have fresh cabbage, radishes, onions or cucumbers, but most of the year you're eating pickled vegetables that have been fermenting in clay jars for months. The pickling process uses salt, which is expensive, so poor families often undersalt their vegetables, leading to spoilage and food poisoning. Soybeans are a major source of protein, usually fermented into pastes and sauces. Fermented soy products smell awful, like rotting fish mixed with vinegar, but they're cheap, nutritious, and keep well in hot weather. You learn to hold your breath while eating them. Meat is a luxury reserved for special occasions. Pork is the most common meat when you can afford it, but it's often poorly preserved and contaminated with parasites. Chicken and duck are expensive because the birds are more valuable for their eggs than their meat. Fish is available near rivers and coasts, but it spoils quickly and is often salted to the point of being inedible. The cooking methods are simple but time-consuming. Everything is cooked over an open fire in iron pots or clay vessels. There's no temperature control, so food is either undercooked and potentially dangerous, or overcooked and tough as leather. Stir-frying exists, but it requires expensive oil that most families can't afford. Water is a constant problem. Well, water is often contaminated with sewage and animal waste. River water is slightly better, but it has to be boiled before drinking, which requires fuel for fires. Most people drink weak tea or rice wine because the brewing process kills some of the harmful bacteria. Food storage is another challenge. There's no refrigeration, so everything has to be preserved by salting, drying, smoking, or fermentation. These preservation methods change the taste and texture of food dramatically. Fresh meat becomes tough jerky, fresh vegetables become sour pickles, fresh milk becomes pungent cheese. Spices and seasonings are expensive and often adulterated with cheaper substances. Salt is heavily taxed by the government and is sometimes mixed with sand or dirt to increase its weight. Pepper, ginger, and other spices are imported at great cost and are often fake, ground roots or leaves that look like the real thing but have no flavour. Food preparation is time-consuming and dangerous. Cooking fires are a constant fire hazard in wooden houses with paper windows. Burns from hot oil or boiling water are common. Food poisoning from spoiled ingredients is a regular occurrence that people just accept as part of life. But the biggest food-related danger is famine. Bad weather, insect swarms, or political instability can destroy crops and leave entire regions without enough food to survive. During famine years, people eat tree bark, grass, dirt mixed with grain, and sometimes resort to cannibalism. Food riots are common and often violently suppressed by government troops. Social status determines what you're allowed to eat. Peasants are forbidden from eating rice during certain times of year. It has to be saved for tax payments to the government. Merchants can't wear silk or eat certain luxury foods that are reserved for officials. Even if you can afford better food, eating above your social station is illegal and can result in punishment. Meals are eaten in silence, with specific rules about who eats first, how much each person gets, and what foods are appropriate for different occasions. Children eat last and get the smallest portions. Women serve the men before eating themselves. Elderly relatives get special foods that are easier to chew and digest. And here's the kicker. Even when you have enough food, even when it's properly prepared and safely preserved, you're still probably malnourished. The average diet lacks essential vitamins and minerals, leading to diseases like scurvy, rickets, and beriberi. People are shorter, weaker, and sicker than they would be with proper nutrition. So you sit down to your bowl of brown rice mixed with millet, topped with fermented vegetables, and a tiny piece of salted fish if you're lucky. You eat quickly and quietly, grateful for what you have, while knowing that tomorrow's meal isn't guaranteed. And you try not to think about the various ways this food might kill you slowly. You've survived breakfast, work and lunch, but navigating the social landscape of Han Dynasty China is perhaps more treacherous than anything you've faced so far. This is a society built on rigid hierarchy, where everyone has a specific place and stepping out of line can result in anything from public humiliation to execution. At the top of this pyramid sits the emperor, known as the Son of Heaven. He's considered the earthly representative of divine will, and his authority is absolute. Below him are various levels of nobles, officials, scholars, and military officers, each with specific ranks, privileges, and responsibilities. You know their status by their clothing colours, the decorations on their hats, the number of horses in their entourage, and the way people bow when they pass. If you're a farmer, you're at the bottom of the social ladder, just above slaves and criminals. This means that everyone, and I mean everyone, outranks you. Merchants, craftsmen, minor officials, teachers, even shopkeepers can order you around and expect obedience. Failure to show proper respect can result in beatings, fines, or worse. The rules of social interaction are complex and unforgiving. When you encounter someone of higher rank, you must bow properly. The depth and duration of your bow depends on the exact difference in your social positions. Bow too little, and you're showing disrespect. Bow too much, and you're being sarcastic or claiming a lower status than you actually have, which is also problematic. Your language must change depending on who you're talking to. There are different pronouns for addressing superiors, equals, and inferiors. Different verb forms for speaking to men versus women, young versus old, urban versus rural people. Using the wrong form of address is a serious social error that marks you as ignorant, disrespectful, or dangerously rebellious. Physical positioning matters enormously. You can't sit in the presence of a superior unless specifically invited. You can't eat before someone of higher rank has started eating. You can't speak unless spoken to first. Even the direction you face when talking to someone is regulated by complex rules of etiquette. Marriage is entirely arranged by families based on social compatibility and economic advantage. Love is irrelevant. You marry within your social class, and marrying above your station is nearly impossible unless you've somehow acquired wealth or education. Women have no choice in their marriage partners and are expected to obey their husbands in all things. Your clothing, food, housing, and even your hairstyle are regulated by law according to your social position. Wearing colours or fabrics above your station is illegal. Living in a house too grand for your rank is forbidden. Even the number of dishes you can serve at a meal is determined by your social status. Education is reserved for the wealthy and well-connected. If you're a farmer's child, you'll never learn to read or write. Books are hand-copied and expensive. Teachers charge fees that ordinary families can't afford. The imperial examination system exists to select government officials, but it's designed to exclude anyone who wasn't born into privilege. The legal system is explicitly unequal. Crimes committed by people of higher rank are punished less severely than the same crimes committed by lower-ranked individuals. If a nobleman kills a peasant, he might pay a fine. If a peasant strikes a nobleman, he faces execution. The law literally has different rules for different classes of people. Social mobility is extremely limited. You're born into your class, and you'll almost certainly die in it. The rare exceptions, merchants who become wealthy enough to buy minor titles or scholars who pass imperial examinations, are celebrated precisely because they're so unusual. And here's the psychological toll. You're constantly aware of your inferior position. You spend your entire life bowing, deferring, and apologising to people who view you as barely human. You develop an automatic reflex of submission that becomes so ingrained you don't even notice it anymore. The surveillance is constant. Your neighbours watch you for signs of disloyalty or social climbing. Local officials monitor your behaviour for anything that might challenge the established order. Even your family members might report you to authorities if you say or do something inappropriate. This system isn't just about maintaining order. It's about maintaining a worldview where inequality is natural and questioning the hierarchy is literally unthinkable. You learn to see your low status as inevitable, moral, and correct. Accepting your place isn't just practical, it's virtuous. So as you navigate your day, every interaction is a reminder of your position at the bottom of a vast social pyramid. You bow, you defer, you speak carefully, and you never, ever forget that in Han Dynasty China, knowing your place isn't just social wisdom, it's survival. You're thirsty. This might seem like a simple problem with a simple solution, but in Han Dynasty China, finding safe water to drink is a daily challenge that can literally kill you if you get it wrong. Let's start with your options. There's the well in your courtyard, if you're fortunate enough to have one. Wells are expensive to dig and maintain, so most families share with their neighbours. The well water looks clear, but appearances are deceiving. Human and animal waste seeps into groundwater from latrines, animal pens, and fertilised fields. Drinking well water is essentially playing Russian roulette with dysentery, cholera, and intestinal parasites. River water is another option, but rivers are also used for transportation, irrigation, waste disposal, and washing clothes. Upstream, someone might be dumping the contents of their latrine into the water. Downstream, that same water flows past your village, carrying diseases, dead animals, and human waste. Boiling river water helps, but it requires fuel for fires, and many families can't afford to boil all their drinking water. Rainwater can be collected in ceramic jars, but these containers quickly become breeding grounds for mosquitoes and other insects. The water sits stagnant for weeks, developing a green film of algae and attracting every flying pest in the neighbourhood. Rainwater also picks up dust, bird droppings, and pollution from the air as it falls. The safest option is weak tea or rice wine, because the brewing process involves boiling water, which kills some of the harmful bacteria. But tea requires tea leaves, which cost money. Rice wine requires rice, which you might not have enough of. Many families survive on water that they know might make them sick, simply because they have no alternative. Water storage is a constant problem. You need containers to hold water, but pottery cracks, wood rots, and metal is expensive. Most families use a combination of ceramic jars, wooden buckets, and gourd vessels that all need constant maintenance and cleaning. Cleaning containers is difficult when you don't have clean water to clean them with. You rinse vessels with the least dirty water available and hope for the best. Soap made from ash and animal fat helps, but it's harsh enough to damage containers and leave a residue that affects the taste of stored water. The daily water routine is labour-intensive and time-consuming. Someone in your family, usually the women or children, has to walk to the water source multiple times per day, carrying heavy containers back home. During dry seasons, you might have to walk miles to find water, and you're competing with other families for access to the same limited sources. Water rights are serious business that can lead to violent conflicts. Families fight over access to wells. Villages fight over river rights. Upstream communities are constantly tempted to divert water for their own use, leaving downstream communities without enough for drinking, cooking, and irrigation. During drought years, water becomes more precious than food. People abandon their homes and migrate toward rumoured water sources. Temporary markets spring up where water is sold by the cup at prices that would bankrupt most families. Desperate people drink from muddy puddles, animal troughs, and stagnant ponds, knowing they'll probably get sick but hoping they won't die. Your body is constantly dehydrated because you're afraid to drink enough water to stay properly hydrated. You ration your water intake to make your supply last longer, which leaves you weak, dizzy, and prone to heat exhaustion during hot weather and physical labour. Bathing and washing use the same questionable water sources. You might be cleaning yourself with water that's dirtier than you are. Washing clothes in contaminated water can spread diseases through your family. Even washing cooking utensils becomes a health hazard when the water you're washing with is contaminated. Children are especially vulnerable to waterborne diseases. Their smaller bodies become dehydrated faster, and their developing immune systems can't fight off infections as effectively as adult immune systems. Child mortality from water-related diseases is devastatingly high. You develop a sixth sense about water quality, learning to judge safety by smell, taste, colour, and clarity. But these methods are unreliable. Water that looks and tastes fine can still harbour deadly bacteria. Water that smells bad might be safe to drink after boiling. You make life or death decisions based on incomplete information and hope you're guessing correctly. The psychological stress of never having access to clean, safe water is exhausting. You're constantly worried about getting sick, about your family getting sick, about your water supply running out. You develop elaborate rituals around water use, specific prayers, cleaning ceremonies, purification methods that provide psychological comfort even when they don't actually make the water safer. So when you're thirsty in ancient China, you don't just drink water, you evaluate risk, consider alternatives, perform calculations about necessity versus safety, and make compromises that modern people would find unthinkable. And sometimes, despite all your precautions, you get sick anyway. Because in a world without water treatment plants, waterborne illness isn't a possibility. It's an inevitability. You've managed to survive another meal without dying from food poisoning. Congratulations. But now comes one of the most terrifying aspects of life in Han Dynasty China. Dealing with the government, a massive bureaucratic machine that views you as a source of labour, taxes, and compliance, rather than as a human being with rights or dignity. The Han government is the most sophisticated administrative system the world has ever seen, and every bit of that sophistication is focused on extracting maximum value from your miserable existence. You exist to serve the state, and the state has very specific ideas about how you should live, work, and die. Let's start with taxes, which aren't just about money. The government wants a portion of everything you produce. If you're a farmer, you owe grain taxes calculated based on the theoretical productivity of your land, not the actual amount you harvest. Bad weather, crop failure, or natural disasters don't reduce your tax burden. They just make it impossible to pay. The grain tax is collected in person by government officials who arrive at your farm with carts and measuring tools. They're not interested in your explanations about poor harvests or sick family members. They want their grain, and if you don't have it, they'll take whatever you do have. Your tools, your furniture, your livestock, your children as slaves. In addition to grain taxes, you owe labour taxes. Every adult male must work on government projects for a certain number of days each year. This might involve building roads, digging canals, constructing palaces, or serving in the military. You're not paid for this work. You're expected to provide your own food and tools while labouring for the state. The corvée labour system can take you away from your farm during critical planting or harvest times. While you're building a road for the emperor, your crops might be dying in the fields, but refusing to report for labour duty is a crime punishable by flogging, exile, or death. Women pay a textile tax, providing a certain amount of woven cloth to the government each year. This cloth must meet specific standards for quality and size. If your weaving doesn't pass inspection, you have to start over and still meet your quota. The time spent weaving for the government is time not spent making clothes for your family. The tax collection system is designed to be impossible to satisfy fully. Officials deliberately set quotas higher than what people can reasonably produce, then extract additional payments in exchange for reducing the requirements. Corruption is built into the system. Bribes aren't illegal, they're just another form of taxation. Local officials are evaluated based on how much they collect, not on the welfare of the people in their district. An official who shows mercy to struggling families might be demoted or executed for failing to meet his collection targets. This creates an incentive structure where cruelty is rewarded and compassion is punished. The legal system reinforces governmental power through fear. Laws are complex, contradictory, and constantly changing. What's legal today might be punishable by death tomorrow. You're expected to know and obey all laws, even though most people can't read, and laws aren't publicly posted. Collective responsibility means that you're liable for crimes committed by your neighbours, family members, or anyone in your work unit. If your neighbour steals something, you might be punished along with him. If someone in your village is accused of sedition, everyone might be investigated and punished. The registration system tracks every person in the empire. You must be registered in your home district and carry documentation when travelling. Moving to a new area requires official permission that's expensive and difficult to obtain. This prevents people from escaping oppressive local officials or seeking better opportunities elsewhere. Surveillance is constant and comprehensive. Neighbours are encouraged to report suspicious behaviour. Children are taught to inform on parents who criticise the government. Local officials maintain detailed records of who lives where, what they do for work, how much they own, and how they spend their time. Military service is mandatory and devastating. Young men are conscripted into the army and sent to fight in distant wars against nomadic tribes or rebellious provinces. Military service lasts for years, and many conscripts never return home. Those who do return are often disabled, traumatised, or unable to readjust to civilian life. The government controls the economy through monopolies on essential goods. Salt and iron are produced and distributed only by state-owned enterprises. Private production of these necessities is illegal and punishable by death. This allows the government to control prices and ensure that essential goods are available only to those who can afford them. Education is limited to those who can pay for it and are politically reliable. Most schools are private and expensive. The curriculum focuses on memorizing classical texts that support governmental authority rather than developing critical thinking skills. The goal is to produce obedient bureaucrats, not educated citizens. Religious practice is regulated and monitored. Certain rituals are mandatory. You must participate in ancestor worship and state ceremonies honouring the emperor. Other religious activities are forbidden or restricted. The government decides which gods you're allowed to worship and how you're allowed to worship them. Even marriage and family life are subject to government control. You need official permission to marry. Divorces must be approved by local magistrates. The number of children you're allowed to have might be regulated based on your social status and economic situation. And here's the psychological toll. You live in constant fear of unknowingly breaking some law or regulation. The punishment for most crimes is harsh: flogging, mutilation, exile, or execution. The legal system assumes guilt rather than innocence, and trials are administrative procedures rather than opportunities for defence. You develop an automatic response of submission and obedience that becomes so ingrained you don't even question it. You bow when officials pass. You speak in respectful tones when addressing anyone connected to the government. You hide your thoughts and opinions because expressing them might be interpreted as criticism of the state. The government isn't there to serve you. You exist to serve it. Your role is to produce food, pay taxes, provide labour, fight wars, and die quietly when you're no longer useful. And the most terrifying part is that this system works so efficiently that it becomes the model for governmental control that will dominate China for the next 2,000 years. After surviving taxes, disease, malnutrition, dangerous working conditions, contaminated food, polluted water, government oppression, and the constant threat of natural disasters, you might think you're ready for whatever ancient China can throw at you. But now comes the final challenge: death itself, which in Han Dynasty China is usually early, often painful, and always complicated by religious and social obligations that can bankrupt your surviving family members. Let's be realistic about life expectancy. If you make it to age 40, you're doing exceptionally well. The average person dies in their 20s or 30s, assuming they survive childhood at all. Infant mortality is staggeringly high. Nearly half of all children die before their 5th birthday from diseases that would be easily treatable today. For women, childbirth is one of the leading causes of death. There's no prenatal care, no understanding of hygiene during delivery, and no medical intervention when things go wrong. Women often die from hemorrhaging, infection, or complications that modern medicine could prevent or treat. Having a baby is literally a life or death gamble. Men face different but equally deadly risks. Farming accidents, injuries from animals, infections from minor cuts, and occupational hazards, like black lung disease from working in smoky environments. Military service during frequent wars against nomadic tribes means many young men die violently, far from home. But even if you avoid accidents and violence, you're still facing a host of diseases that will eventually kill you. Tuberculosis, malaria, dysentery, and other infectious diseases are endemic. Without antibiotics or modern medical care, a simple cut can become infected and kill you. A common cold can develop into pneumonia that's fatal. The actual process of dying is usually prolonged and uncomfortable. Pain management doesn't exist beyond opium for the wealthy or alcohol for everyone else. You die slowly, in pain, surrounded by family members who are helpless to ease your suffering. Death isn't quick or merciful. It's a gradual deterioration that everyone can see coming, but no one can prevent. When death becomes inevitable, complex social and religious obligations take over. Your family must perform specific rituals to ensure your spirit successfully transitions to the afterlife. These rituals are expensive and time-consuming, often requiring the family to go into debt to pay for proper ceremonies. The body must be prepared according to strict traditional methods. This involves washing, dressing in specific burial clothes, and positioning in prescribed ways. The preparation process takes days and requires hiring specialists who know the proper procedures. Mistakes in funeral preparation can supposedly doom the deceased to an unpleasant afterlife and bring bad luck to the surviving family. Burial practices are elaborate and costly. The deceased must be buried with personal possessions, food for the journey to the afterlife, and sometimes valuable items that the family can't really afford to lose. Wealthy families bury their dead with jade, gold, and other treasures. Poor families go into debt trying to provide appropriate burial goods. The gravesite must be chosen carefully, often with the advice of feng shui experts who charge fees for determining the most auspicious location. The wrong burial location can supposedly curse the family for generations. Even poor families feel pressured to pay for proper site selection, even if it means financial hardship. Mourning periods are strictly regulated by law and tradition. Children must mourn their parents for specific periods, wearing special clothes and observing dietary restrictions. During mourning, you can't work, celebrate, or participate in normal social activities. This creates economic hardship for families who lose their primary breadwinner. Ancestor worship becomes a permanent financial obligation. The deceased must be honoured with regular offerings of food, incense, and prayers. Families maintain shrines in their homes and make pilgrimages to grave sites for annual ceremonies. Failing to properly honour ancestors is believed to bring disaster to the living family members. But here's a grim reality. Many families simply can't afford proper funerals and burial. Poor people are often buried in unmarked graves with minimal ceremony. Bodies might be cremated, which is cheaper but considered inappropriate according to traditional beliefs. Some families abandon bodies rather than go into crushing debt for funeral expenses. Epidemic diseases create mass death situations that overwhelm traditional burial practices. During plague years, bodies are burned in mass graves or simply abandoned. The normal social structures around death break down when too many people die too quickly for proper ceremonies. Suicide is sometimes seen as an honourable alternative to a shameful death. Officials facing demotion or disgrace might kill themselves to preserve their family's honour. Women facing rape or dishonour might choose death rather than social disgrace. But suicide is also viewed as abandoning one's filial duties, creating complex moral contradictions. The afterlife itself is complicated and uncertain. Traditional Chinese beliefs describe multiple souls that separate at death and travel to different destinations. Some parts of your spirit remain in the grave, others journey to an underworld ruled by bureaucratic judges who evaluate your moral worthiness. The afterlife is essentially a continuation of earthly bureaucracy, complete with paperwork and corruption. Your surviving family members are responsible for your spiritual welfare after death. They must provide regular offerings, maintain your grave, and perform annual ceremonies to ensure your continued well-being in the afterlife. This creates ongoing financial obligations that can burden families for generations. Death records are maintained by local officials for tax and administrative purposes. When you die, your family must report your death and pay fees for official documentation. Even in death, the government wants its paperwork and fees. Your death becomes another bureaucratic transaction. Children who die young receive different treatment than adults. They might be buried near the house rather than in formal cemeteries. Their spiritual status is uncertain because they haven't completed the moral development necessary for full personhood. Infant mortality is so common that families often don't name children until they've survived their first year. And here's perhaps the most depressing aspect. Death in ancient China is often a relief from the suffering of life. The constant hunger, pain, fear and oppression make death seem like a peaceful alternative. People don't fear death as much as they fear continuing to live under such harsh conditions. Your grave, if you have one, will probably be forgotten within a generation or two. Unless you're wealthy enough to maintain a family cemetery with permanent caretakers, your resting place will be abandoned, overgrown, and eventually lost. Most people disappear completely from historical memory within decades of their death. So as you contemplate your own mortality in Han Dynasty China, remember that dying isn't just about stopping breathing. It's about navigating complex social, religious, and economic obligations that can destroy your family's financial stability while supposedly ensuring your spiritual welfare. Death isn't an escape from the hardships of ancient Chinese life. It's just another expensive, complicated, and potentially disastrous challenge that your family will have to survive somehow. Let's talk about love, romance, and marriage in Han Dynasty China. If you're imagining tender courtships, romantic poetry, and marriages based on mutual affection, prepare to be disappointed. Love in ancient China is a luxury that most people literally cannot afford, and marriage is a business transaction designed to benefit families rather than individuals. First, let's address the elephant in the room. You probably won't choose your own spouse. Marriage is arranged by families based on economic compatibility, social status, and astrological calculations. Your parents, or if they're dead, your eldest male relatives, will negotiate with other families to find a suitable match. Your personal preferences, attractions, or desires are completely irrelevant to this process. The negotiations begin when you reach marriageable age, which is disturbingly young by modern standards. Girls are often betrothed by age 12 and married by 14 or 15. Boys might marry slightly later, around 16 or 17, but only if their families can afford the expense of supporting a wife. Marriage isn't about emotional readiness, it's about economic utility and reproductive capacity. The matchmaking process involves professional go-betweens who evaluate potential matches based on family reputation, financial status, and physical characteristics. These matchmakers charge fees for their services and often accept bribes to recommend certain candidates. Your future spouse is chosen based on negotiations you're not part of and criteria that have nothing to do with compatibility. Astrology plays a major role in marriage decisions. Your birth date, time, and location are used to calculate your astrological compatibility with potential spouses. If the astrologers determine that your stars don't align with a particular candidate, the marriage is off, regardless of any other considerations. You might lose your perfect match because you were born during an inauspicious lunar phase. The wedding ceremony itself is elaborate, expensive, and focused on the transfer of property rather than the celebration of love. The bride's family must provide a dowry, money, goods, household items, and sometimes land. That becomes the property of the groom's family. Poor families often go into debt to provide adequate dowries for their daughters. The groom's family pays a bride price to compensate the bride's family for their loss of her labour and reproductive capacity. This payment is negotiated like any other business transaction, with haggling over the bride's market value based on her age, health, beauty, and family connections. During the wedding ceremony, the bride and groom might see each other for the first time. There's no dating period, no getting to know you phase, no opportunity to develop feelings before the marriage. You're expected to learn to love your spouse after the wedding, assuming you're lucky enough to develop any affection at all. The bride moves into her husband's family compound and becomes subordinate to her mother-in-law, who often treats her as unpaid domestic labour. The new wife's status in the household is lower than that of servants, because servants are paid and can quit. Wives are property that can't leave without permission. Conjugal rights are entirely one-sided. Husbands can demand sex whenever they want, regardless of their wives' health, preferences or consent. Wives who refuse their husbands can be beaten, divorced, or sold to other families. Marital rape doesn't exist as a concept because wives are considered their husband's property. Divorce is possible, but heavily biased against women. The 7 grounds for divorce allow men to divorce wives for reasons including disobedience to in-laws, failure to produce sons, adultery, jealousy, disease, theft, or simply being too talkative. Women can only initiate divorce under extremely limited circumstances, usually involving physical abuse so severe that it threatens their lives. Polygamy is legal and encouraged for wealthy men. Rich men often have multiple wives and numerous concubines, creating complex household hierarchies where women compete for their husband's attention and resources. The senior wife has authority over junior wives and concubines, but everyone is subject to the husband's absolute authority. Concubines are essentially sex slaves with slightly higher status than servants. They're bought and sold like property, and their children have lower status than children born to official wives. Concubines can be given away, sold, or discarded when their masters tire of them. Love, when it exists, is considered dangerous and potentially disruptive to family harmony. Passionate emotions are viewed as signs of moral weakness that interfere with proper social relationships. Couples who display too much affection for each other are criticised for prioritising personal feelings over family obligations. Sexual education is non-existent. Both men and women enter marriage with no understanding of sexual anatomy, reproduction, or physical intimacy. Wedding nights are often traumatic experiences for both partners, but especially for young brides who have no idea what to expect. Contraception is primitive and unreliable. Most couples have no effective way to prevent pregnancy, leading to frequent childbearing that weakens women's health and strains family resources. Large families are considered desirable for their labour potential, regardless of the physical and economic costs. Infidelity is punished differently based on gender. Unfaithful wives can be executed or sold into slavery. Unfaithful husbands might face social criticism, but no legal consequences. This double standard reflects women's status as property rather than autonomous individuals with equal rights. And here's perhaps the saddest aspect. Many people never experience romantic love at all. They spend their entire lives in marriages based on duty, obligation, and economic necessity. They might develop affection or mutual respect over time, but passionate love remains a foreign concept that exists only in poetry and stories. So when you think about relationships in ancient China, forget about romance novels and Hollywood movies. Think about business partnerships, where one partner has all the power and the other has all the responsibilities. Think about economic arrangements where love is a luxury that most people can't afford and wouldn't know how to recognise if they experienced it. Marriage in Han Dynasty China isn't about finding your soulmate. It's about creating economic alliances between families while ensuring the reproduction of the next generation. And if you're lucky enough to find some happiness in this arrangement, well, that's just an unexpected bonus in a system designed for everything except personal fulfillment. After enduring all of these daily hardships, you might wonder how people in Han Dynasty China manage to find any enjoyment in life. The answer is that entertainment exists, but like everything else in ancient China, it's heavily regulated, expensive, and often more exhausting than relaxing. Let's start with festivals, which are the main source of entertainment for ordinary people. The Chinese calendar is filled with festivals celebrating seasonal changes, agricultural cycles, and important historical events. But these aren't casual celebrations. They're elaborate community obligations that require significant preparation and expense. The Spring Festival, similar to modern Chinese New Year, is the biggest celebration of the year. But preparing for it is a months-long ordeal that involves cleaning every surface of your house, paying off debts, buying new clothes, and preparing special foods. Poor families often go into debt just to participate adequately in festival celebrations. Festival foods are special and expensive. Dumplings require wheat flour that costs more than rice. Sweet rice cakes need sugar that's imported at great expense. Special wines and teas for festivals can cost more than a family earns in a week. But failing to provide appropriate festival foods brings shame on your family and bad luck for the coming year. Public entertainment during festivals includes puppet shows, storytelling, acrobatics, and musical performances. But these aren't free events. Performers expect payment, and good viewing positions near the performance areas are claimed by wealthy families. Poor people watch from the back of crowds if they can afford to take time off work to attend at all. Music is an important part of Chinese culture, but learning to play instruments requires lessons that most families can't afford. Simple bamboo flutes are relatively inexpensive, but proper musical instruments like guqin, stringed instruments, or bronze bells are luxury items reserved for the wealthy. Dancing is performed mainly by professional entertainers who travel between towns during festival seasons. These performers live difficult lives, moving constantly and dependent on audiences that might not pay if they don't like the performance. Dancing isn't something ordinary people do for recreation. It's a professional skill that requires years of training. Gambling is popular but illegal and dangerous. People bet on dice games, card games, and various contests involving animals or athletic competitions. Gambling debts can result in slavery, violence, or forced labour. Local officials often participate in gambling while officially enforcing laws against it, creating a system of corruption and arbitrary enforcement. Storytelling is perhaps the most accessible form of entertainment. Professional storytellers travel between villages, sharing epic tales, historical legends, and moral stories. But even this simple entertainment costs money. Storytellers need to eat and often charge fees for their performances. Board games like Shangqi, Chinese chess, and Weiqi, Go, are played by educated people who have time and money for leisure activities. These games require strategy and intellectual development that most working people can't afford to cultivate. Game pieces are often valuable items made from jade, ivory, or precious woods. Religious festivals provide some entertainment, but they're mixed with serious spiritual obligations. Temple fairs include market stalls, food vendors, and performances, but they also require expensive offerings to gods, participation in rituals, and contributions to temple maintenance. Sports and physical competitions exist, but are limited by social class. Martial arts training is expensive and time-consuming. Archery requires equipment that costs more than most people earn in a year. Horse racing and polo are exclusively for the wealthy who can afford to maintain horses. Literature and poetry are created and enjoyed by the educated elite. Most people can't read, so books and written entertainment are inaccessible. Oral poetry and songs exist, but they're often work songs designed to make labour more bearable rather than pure entertainment. Children's entertainment is minimal. Toys are simple items made from scraps, cloth dolls, wooden tops, or small clay figures. Most children spend their time working rather than playing. Games are usually variations of adult activities like mock farming or pretend trading. Seasonal activities provide some relief from routine. During harvest time, communities might organise group activities like husking corn or processing grain, turning necessary work into social occasions. But even these entertaining activities are still work that has to be done regardless of whether anyone enjoys it. Alcohol provides escape for those who can afford it, but it's heavily taxed and regulated. Rice wine is the most common alcoholic beverage, but it's expensive enough that most people drink it only during festivals or special occasions. Drinking to excess is both socially disapproved and economically impractical. The wealthy have access to more sophisticated entertainment, private theatres, elaborate banquets, hunting expeditions, and artistic pursuits like calligraphy and painting. But these activities require education, leisure time, and money that ordinary people simply don't have. And here's the fundamental problem. Most forms of entertainment in ancient China require resources that working people don't have. Time, money, education, and energy are all devoted to survival. Entertainment becomes another luxury that separates the rich from the poor. When ordinary people do find moments of joy, it's often in simple things. Sharing stories while working, singing while walking, or enjoying a moment of rest in pleasant weather. But these brief respites from hardship aren't organised entertainment. They're stolen moments of humanity in lives dominated by struggle. So while entertainment exists in Han Dynasty China, it's not equally accessible to everyone. Like everything else in this hierarchical society, enjoyment is distributed according to wealth and social status. If you're poor, your entertainment is whatever brief moments of pleasure you can find between the endless demands of survival. We've been assuming you're an adult trying to survive in Han Dynasty China, but let's talk about what life is like if you're a child. Spoiler alert, childhood as we understand it, a protected time for play, learning and development, doesn't exist. Children are small adults with adult responsibilities and none of the protections. Let's start with the harsh reality of infant mortality. Nearly half of all children die before their 5th birthday from diseases, malnutrition, accidents, or simple neglect. Parents don't form strong emotional attachments to very young children because the odds of survival are so poor. Many families don't even name children until they've survived their first year. Birth itself is dangerous for both mother and child. There's no prenatal care, no understanding of sterile conditions during delivery, and no medical intervention when complications arise. Childbirth takes place in the family home, attended by female relatives or a local midwife with no formal training. Many babies die during delivery, and many mothers die shortly afterward from infections or hemorrhaging. If you survive birth, your early years are spent in conditions that would horrify modern parents. You sleep on the same wooden platform as the rest of your family, with no crib, no baby proofing, and constant exposure to smoke from cooking fires, dust from dirt floors, and the various diseases that affect everyone in your crowded household. Feeding is problematic from the start. If your mother is healthy and well nourished, breastfeeding provides some nutrition and protection from disease. But many mothers are malnourished themselves and can't produce adequate milk. There's no formula, no baby food, just whatever soft foods the family can provide, often pre-chewed rice or thin gruel that lacks essential nutrients. By age 3 or 4, you're expected to contribute to family work. This might involve feeding chickens, gathering eggs, spinning thread, or helping with simple household tasks. There are no child labour laws, no mandatory education, and no concept of childhood as a time for play, rather than productivity. Education is reserved for wealthy boys who can afford private tutors. Girls are almost never taught to read or write, regardless of their family's wealth. Poor boys receive no formal education either. They're needed for farm work and can't be spared for schooling that doesn't contribute to family survival. If you do receive education, it's based on memorization rather than understanding. Students spend hours reciting classical texts without necessarily comprehending their meaning. Physical punishment for academic failures is common and severe. Teachers beat students with bamboo canes for mistakes in recitation or improper behaviour. Physical discipline at home is harsh and frequent. Children who disobey, talk back, or fail to work hard enough are beaten with sticks, locked in dark rooms, or denied food. Parents believe that harsh discipline builds character and prevents children from becoming lazy or disrespectful adults. Childhood diseases are often fatal without modern medical care. Measles, whooping cough, diarrheal diseases, and respiratory infections kill children regularly. Families accept these deaths as inevitable, rather than preventable tragedies. Surviving children develop immunity to local diseases, but remain vulnerable to new illnesses. Accidents are common and often serious. Children work around open fires, sharp tools, large animals, and dangerous machinery without safety equipment or supervision. Burns, cuts, broken bones, and crushing injuries happen regularly. Many children are permanently disabled by workplace accidents that could have been prevented with proper safety measures. Malnutrition affects most children, even in relatively prosperous families. The diet lacks adequate protein, vitamins, and minerals necessary for proper development. Children are smaller, weaker, and less healthy than they would be with proper nutrition. Stunted growth from childhood malnutrition affects people throughout their lives. Child marriage is common and legal. Girls are often betrothed by age 10 and married by 14 or 15. These marriages are business arrangements between families, and children have no say in the decision. Young wives become domestic servants in their husbands' households, with little difference between marriage and slavery. Sexual abuse of children is common but rarely reported or punished. Children have no legal protections and no recourse when adults abuse them. Families might ignore abuse to maintain important social or economic relationships. Children learn to accept mistreatment as normal and inevitable. Abandonment of unwanted children, especially girls, is practiced when families can't afford to raise them. Abandoned children might be sold into slavery, adopted by other families, as unpaid servants, or simply left to die. Gender preferences mean that girls are much more likely to be abandoned than boys. Children who survive to adolescence often suffer from years of accumulated health problems. Poor nutrition, untreated injuries, exposure to smoke and pollutants, and constant stress take permanent tolls on developing bodies and minds. Many teenagers look and feel much older than their actual ages. Psychological development is stunted by trauma, violence, and the constant stress of survival. Children don't have opportunities to develop creativity, critical thinking, or emotional intelligence. They learn to be obedient, silent, and useful, rather than curious, expressive, or independent. The transition to adulthood happens early and abruptly. By age 12 or 13, children are doing adult work and bearing adult responsibilities. There's no gradual transition, no extended adolescence, no time to mature emotionally before facing adult challenges. Childhood simply ends one day, and adult life begins. And perhaps saddest of all, many children never experience the love, protection, and nurturing that we consider essential to healthy development. They're valued for their economic contribution rather than their inherent worth as human beings. They grow up knowing that their lives are expendable and their suffering is unimportant. So if you're imagining what it would be like to be a child in Han Dynasty China, don't think about playgrounds and bedtime stories. Think about working 12-hour days in dangerous conditions, going to bed hungry most nights, and learning that your value as a person depends entirely on your usefulness to adults who see you as property rather than family. Childhood in ancient China isn't a magical time of innocence and wonder. It's a brutal apprenticeship in survival that most children don't complete successfully. So there you have it, a complete day in the life of Han Dynasty China. From your bug-infested wake-up call to your final prayers that you'll survive until tomorrow. By now, you've probably realised that every aspect of ancient Chinese life, from eating breakfast to paying taxes to finding love, is essentially a creative form of suffering designed to test the limits of human endurance. You've awakened on a wooden plank covered with bugs, relieved yourself into a communal bucket, eaten grey porridge that might contain actual sawdust, gotten dressed in scratchy government-regulated clothing, brushed your teeth with a stick, and started your day by working in fields that might flood, freeze, or be confiscated by tax collectors at any moment. You've discovered that water is more dangerous than alcohol, that medicine is often more deadly than disease, and that food is an ongoing experiment in creative ways to get sick. You've learned that the government views you as a resource to be exploited, that marriage is a business transaction, and that childhood is essentially unpaid internship in misery. You've realised that entertainment is a luxury you can't afford, that death is often preferable to continued living, and that the most common emotion in ancient China isn't happiness or fulfillment. It's a resigned acceptance that suffering is the natural state of human existence. But here's what's remarkable. Despite all of this, people in Han Dynasty China still found ways to laugh, create art, tell stories, fall in love, raise families, and build one of the most sophisticated civilizations in human history. They didn't just survive, they developed philosophy, literature, technology, and cultural traditions that influence the world today. They created paper, gunpowder, the compass, and printing technology. They built the foundations of traditional Chinese medicine, developed complex astronomical calculations, and established governmental systems that lasted for centuries. They wrote poetry that still moves people today and created art that fills museums around the world. And they did all of this while dealing with problems that would send modern people into therapy for decades. They lived with constant pain, hunger, fear and uncertainty, yet somehow found the strength to build something greater than their individual suffering. Perhaps that's the real lesson from our journey through ancient China. Human resilience is extraordinary. People can adapt to almost any conditions, find meaning in the most difficult circumstances, and create beauty even in the midst of widespread misery. Today, when you flip a light switch, turn on a faucet, grab food from a refrigerator, or take medicine for a headache, remember that these simple actions represent the accumulated efforts of thousands of generations of people who lived and died without access to any of these conveniences. When you complain about traffic or slow internet, or your coffee being too cold, remember the people who spent their entire lives wondering where their next meal would come from, and whether they'd survive another winter. And when you feel stressed about modern problems, deadlines, relationships, bills, or social media drama, remember that your ancestors dealt with famine, plague, war, and oppression, while somehow finding the strength to keep going and build the foundation for the comfortable life you live today. So as you settle into your comfortable bed tonight, with clean sheets, climate control, and the reasonable expectation that you'll wake up tomorrow in better health than you went to sleep, take a moment to appreciate the long, difficult journey that brought humanity from wooden sleeping platforms covered with bugs to the modern world. The people of Han Dynasty China lived and died so that you could have a better life. The least you can do is enjoy it, appreciate it, and maybe complain about it a little less. Sleep well, and remember, you're living in the most comfortable, safe, and abundant period in human history. Your worst day is probably better than the best day most people in ancient China ever experienced. And with that comforting thought, let yourself drift off to sleep, grateful for central heating, indoor plumbing, and the fact that tomorrow's breakfast probably won't contain actual tree bark or mystery insects. Good night, and sweet dreams of a world where suffering isn't the default setting of human existence.